Of the many relics sought by the Third Reich, none possessed the mystical power and allure of the Spear of Destiny. Legend has it, this was the very spear the Roman centurion, Longinus, used to pierce the side of Christ on the cross. For centuries, it was believed that whoever possessed this spear held the fate of the world in their hands. It passed from one great conqueror to another, from Constantine the Great to Charlemagne, from the Holy Roman Emperors to the Habsburg dynasty, and everyone who held it was invincible. For Adolf Hitler, with his belief in providence and occult forces, this spear was not just a historical artifact. It was the ultimate symbol of power, the key to world domination. As a young, penniless artist in Vienna, he would stand for hours in the Hofburg Palace treasury, mesmerized by the ancient, time-darkened spearhead displayed in a glass case. He was convinced it was his destiny to possess it. His dream came true in 1938. Immediately after the annexation of Austria, one of Hitler's first orders was to confiscate the Habsburg imperial regalia. Under the cover of night, in a special armored train, the Spear of Destiny, along with other treasures, was transported from Vienna to Nuremberg, the ideological capital of Nazism. There, it was placed in a special vault beneath St. Catherine's Church, becoming the secret heart of the Reich. Hitler believed that as long as the spear was with him, his armies would be fortunate, and his power would be unbreakable. And for several years, it was. The Wehrmacht rolled through Europe like a steamroller, victory following victory. But in 1943, after the crushing defeat at Stalingrad, the Reich's fortunes turned. And it was then, as some mystical historians claim, that Hitler began to have doubts, not in himself, but in the spear's authenticity. In the secret archives of the Ahnenerbe, found after the war, there are mentions of Himmler initiating Project Longinus on the Führer's personal order. Its goal was to determine the true origin and properties of the Vienna relic. The best metallurgists, historians, and most importantly, SS psychics and mediums were gathered in Nuremberg. Their conclusions, presented in a top-secret report, threw Hitler into a rage. According to this report, the spear from Vienna, though ancient, was likely a clever copy made in the Middle Ages. The real Spear of Destiny, according to Ahnenerbe's experts, had been broken into 3 pieces during the Crusades. One part, the tip, was lost somewhere in the Holy Land. The second, a fragment of the shaft, was kept in the Vatican. And the third, most important central part with a nail from the crucifixion, was supposedly smuggled out by the Knights Templar and hidden in Europe. And it was this part, in their opinion, that held the greatest power. A frantic, secret hunt began. SS agents scoured all of occupied Europe, opening ancient tombs, interrogating historians, and plundering monastery libraries. They were looking for traces of the real spear, and it seems that in 1944, their search was successful. The trail led them to Austria, to an old, abandoned salt mine near Altusee. This place was already being used by the Nazis as a giant repository for thousands of art pieces stolen from across Europe. But in the deepest, most isolated tunnel, behind several armored doors, they found what they were looking for. In a lead sarcophagus marked with Templar runes lay a time-darkened piece of wood, about 1 meter long, with a massive, rusty nail driven into it. When the artifact was delivered to Wewelsburg, Himmler immediately ordered a ritual. The psychics, upon touching the shaft, fell into a deep trance. They claimed to feel an incredible, monstrous energy emanating from it. But this energy was not divine. It was dark, ancient, and hostile. One medium, in a fit, screamed that this spear had indeed been at the foot of the cross, but it had pierced not Christ, but one of the thieves crucified next to him, and that it had absorbed not divine grace, but all the pain, rage, and despair of a dying sinner. This was not the spear of destiny, it was the spear of sorrow. Himmler was ecstatic. For his dark worldview, such an artifact was even more valuable. He believed that with it, he could not just win, but subjugate the will of his enemies, sowing chaos and fear. He ordered a special vault built for the spear in the heart of Wewelsburg and began conducting occult rituals with it, trying to release and direct its power. But in April 1945, with the war already lost, American troops approached Altaussee. The mine's commandant received orders to blow up all entrances, burying himself and the priceless art treasures under tons of salt. But at the last moment, local miners and Wehrmacht officers, unwilling to destroy cultural heritage, sabotaged the explosion. The mine was saved. The Americans entered and discovered thousands of paintings, sculptures, and books. Among them was the Vienna relic, the Spear of Destiny, which the Nazis had thoughtfully returned to the mine to create a false trail. It was this spear that General Patton triumphantly returned to Vienna. The world was convinced that the Reich's main mystical relic had been found and neutralized. And the real Spear of Sorrow? Himmler, realizing all was lost, ordered it hidden. Along with his personal archive and some of the SS gold, it was placed in that same lead container with his personal seal and secretly buried. Only a few trusted officers knew the location, and they either died or disappeared in the final days of the war. Thus, the truth about the replica and the real artifact was buried for decades, until 2022, during construction work in a forest near the Austrian town of St. Georgen an der Gusen, site of one of the most horrific subcamps of Mauthausen. An excavator hit something hard. It was that very lead container. When it was opened in the presence of Austrian authorities and historians, it did indeed contain an ancient piece of wood with a nail. The artifact was immediately placed in a special laboratory for study. And that's when things got strange. People working with the spear began complaining of nightmares, fits of unprovoked aggression, and depression. Electronics in the lab constantly failed, and physical instruments detected a weak but stable tachyon field around the artifact, as if it existed in multiple timelines at once. Radiocarbon dating showed that the wood and the metal of the nail indeed dated back to the 1st century AD. But spectral analysis revealed something shocking. Traces of biological material were found on the nail's surface, DNA. And this DNA was not human. It had a triple helix and contained markers not found in any known species on Earth. The scientists were stumped. What was this artifact? Whose blood was on it? And what power did it truly possess? They decided to conduct a risky experiment. Using a laser, they separated a microscopic particle from the nail and placed it in a nutrient medium to try and clone the cells. The moment the laser touched the metal, something no one could have predicted happened. The artifact didn't explode. It didn't light up. It simply spoke. Not with a voice, but with a powerful telepathic wave that struck the consciousness of everyone within a kilometer. It wasn't human language. It was a scream of unspeakable, endless agony that had lasted for millions of years. Almost everyone in the lab went insane, and those who held on saw it. For a split second, reality around them distorted, and they saw an image. A desolate, red planet under 2 suns, and a giant, tree-like creature nailed by a similar spear to a rock. And they understood. This spear was indeed an instrument of execution, but not on Golgotha, and not 2,000 years ago, but in another star system, millions of years ago, and its victim was not a man, and not a god, but something much, much older, and its agony was sealed in this piece of metal, like a genie in a bottle, and the Nazis, in their ignorance, had almost let it out. But with their experiment, modern scientists, it seemed, had just broken the seal. The wave of mental agony that burst from the spear swept through the lab, leaving chaos and madness in its wake. The security systems automatically sealed the complex, trapping those left inside. But the effect wasn't contained by the lab's walls. It bled out into the world like an invisible plague. All across the globe, people began experiencing inexplicable fits of rage, despair, and fear. Conflicts, hate crimes, and mass riots surged. The world, already fragile, began to crack at the seams. The ancient sorrow sealed in the artifact had begun to poison humanity's collective unconscious. The few scientists who kept their sanity realized what they had done. The spear was not just a transmitter. It was a kind of psychic resonator, an amplifier for negative emotions. And now that the seal was broken, it began to actively feed on suffering, growing stronger. The more chaos in the world, the more powerful the artifact became. It was a vicious cycle, leading to global collapse. They were trapped. Escaping the sealed laboratory was impossible. And inside, in the central vault, lay the spear, which was now not just emitting a background field, but faintly pulsating with a crimson light, like the waking heart of an ancient, evil god. But the victim from another world, crucified millions of years ago, had left behind not only a curse, it had also left a key. The team of scientists, led by Dr. Elisa Sheridan, a specialist in quantum biology, began to frantically study the data from the non-human DNA. They discovered that the triple helix was not just a complex structure, it was a code, a biological language that described not only the creature's genetics, but also the physical laws of its universe. And in this code, they found a sequence they called the containment protocol. It was a kind of genetic command capable of neutralizing the psychic radiation. But to activate it, a catalyst was needed. According to the decoded message, this catalyst was a specific sound resonance, a harmonic capable of attuning to the spear's vibrations and putting it back to sleep. The problem was, this sound frequency was unbearable for the human ear and brain. Reproducing it in the lab would kill them before it affected the artifact. They needed a way to transmit the sound directly to the spear, bypassing the air. And then, Sheridan remembered the Vienna relic, the Spear of Destiny kept in the Vienna Museum. It was a copy. But what if it wasn't just a fake? What if it was created not to deceive, but as a receiver, a kind of speaker for the real spear? What if the two artifacts, the real Spear of Sorrow and its copy, were quantumly entangled? It was an insane theory, but it was the only one they had. Using one of the surviving terminals, they managed to send an encrypted message to their colleagues in the outside world, explaining the situation and transmitting the precise frequency and modulation of the sound signal. An operation unlike any in history began. As the world plunged into a maelstrom of violence, a small team of special forces and scientists stormed the Hofburg Palace treasury in Vienna. They cordoned off the hall, evacuated the staff, and set up powerful acoustic emitters around the spear's display case. Millions watching the news thought it was another terrorist attack. No one knew that in the silence of the Vienna Museum, the fate of human civilization was being decided. On command from the locked Austrian lab, they activated the generator. The museum hall filled not with sound, but with a sensation. A low-frequency vibration that made vision blur and teeth ache. The glass of the display case rattled, and the ancient spearhead began to glow, a faint, silvery light. At the same instant, in the Austrian lab, a corresponding miracle occurred. The crimson glow of the spear of sorrow began to fade. The mental scream of agony subsided, replaced by a quiet, mournful whisper. The two spears, separated by hundreds of kilometers, had entered into resonance. The copy in Vienna was absorbing the destructive energy, and the original artifact began to fall asleep. But the darkness trapped in the spear would not surrender without a fight. As the crimson glow nearly died out, a glob of black, non-material energy shot out from the spear tip in the Austrian lab. It struck the vault wall, and the metal cracked. The entity trapped within the spear was trying to create a physical body, an avatar, to break free. From the crack in the wall, a creature began to form. It was woven from shadows and despair, its form constantly shifting, but at its center burned two eyes full of ancient hatred. It moved toward the scientists. Dr. Sheridan knew they had only seconds. The sound signal was containing the spear's main power, but its warden, its echo, was already here. They had to sever the link between the spear and its avatar. She ran to the cryogenic unit they used for cooling samples. Grabbing the hose with liquid nitrogen, she aimed it at the forming creature. The stream of super-cold gas hit the shadow figure. A deafening screech, like tearing metal, erupted. The extreme cold was disrupting the avatar's energy structure. The creature began to disintegrate, to melt, turning into black smoke. At that same moment, the spear of sorrow went completely dark. It was once again just a piece of old wood and rusted metal, and in Vienna, its twin stopped glowing. The resonance was complete. The curse was lifted. The lab doors unlocked. The special forces who stormed in found exhausted but living scientists and the remains of black ash on the floor. Across the world, the wave of aggression and panic began to subside as suddenly as it had started. People came to their senses, not understanding what had happened, blaming it on a temporary lapse of reason. It seemed a total victory. But Dr. Sheridan knew it wasn't. They hadn't destroyed the entity. They had only put it to sleep, driven it back into its metal prison. And they had learned a terrible truth. Artifacts like the spear were not unique. The decoded DNA contained coordinates for several other cells scattered across the solar system. One was on Mars, beneath the surface of Syrtis Major. Another was in the icy depths of Europa, a moon of Jupiter. A third was in the Kuiper Belt. The spear was just one of many, a prison for one of many fallen ones, exiled into our reality as a result of that ancient, prehistoric war. And if humanity, in its continued exploration of space, accidentally stumbles upon and opens another such prison without having a resonating key to control it, the consequences would be unpredictable. In the secret report on the incident, Sheridan wrote, "We are playing with forces we do not understand. History is not just the past. It is a minefield of ancient, unresolved conflicts. And every artifact found, every tomb opened, could be a detonator. We thought we were searching for keys to knowledge, but we are actually walking on the lids of sarcophagi where monsters sleep. And our greatest enemy is not them. Our greatest enemy is our own curiosity." The world returned to a fragile semblance of normality, but for those who had been at the epicenter of the spear crisis, it would never be the same. A new, top-secret international organization was formed, codenamed Aegis. Its sole purpose was the search, study, and, if necessary, neutralization of artifacts like the Spear of Sorrow. Dr. Sheridan became its scientific director. The Spear of Sorrow and its Vienna twin were placed in the organization's most secure bunker, built on the ocean floor, where the pressure and cold were meant to serve as additional deterrents. Aegis began its secret work. Using the coordinates from the decoded alien DNA, they directed all their resources toward exploring the solar system. Probes launched under the guise of geological and astronomical missions confirmed their worst fears. On Mars, deep beneath the surface, instruments did indeed detect a gigantic artificial cavity from which a weak but anomalous energy radiation emanated. On Europa, beneath the ice shell, sonar detected a huge, stationary object that was not part of the Moon's geological structure. The prisons were real. But while Aegis looked to the stars, the main threat was brewing on Earth. Some information about the spear incident had leaked, not in its entirety, but in fragments, rumors, which were immediately seized upon by various occult societies, neo-Nazi groups, and simply mad billionaires hungry for power. They understood the main point. There are artifacts on the planet that grant incredible power. And they began their own hunt. The main adversary of Aegis became a shadow organization calling itself the Heirs of Thule. They considered themselves the ideological descendants of the Thule Society and the Ahnenerbe, and were convinced that the Nazis were on the right track, but had run out of time. The heirs had vast financial resources and a sprawling network of agents, and they had managed to acquire a portion of the Ahnenerbe archives that had not fallen into Allied hands. These archives contained information not about the Spear of Sorrow, but about another, no less powerful artifact that the Nazis had searched for, but never found. They called it the Hammer of Lucifer. According to legend, it was a geologist's hammer used by one of the anti-Christian scientists who created life on Earth. It was believed that this hammer could not just destroy matter, but rewrite it at a fundamental level, turning stone into living flesh, or vice versa. The heirs of Thule believed that with it, they could terraform the Earth to their liking, creating a new world for a new, superior race. The trail of the hammer led to Antarctica, not to New Swabia, but to the opposite side of the continent, in the area of the Transantarctic Mountains. It was there that the heirs sent their well-equipped expedition, disguised as a private mining company. Aegis, upon learning of this, sent its own task force there, led by Colonel Cortez, the same one who had survived at Bormann's estate. A race across the ice began. Two secret organizations clashed in a battle for an artifact capable of destroying the world, on the coldest and most desolate continent on the planet. Cortez's team arrived too late. The heirs had already found the entrance to an ancient pre-glacial cave. Inside, in a frozen underground lake embedded in the ice, stood an altar, and on it lay a simple, unremarkable geologist's hammer with a handle made of a black, unearthly material. When the heirs took the hammer in their hands, the glacier trembled. The artifact began to awaken. But it turned out not to be a tool of creation. The Nazi mystics had gotten it all wrong again. It wasn't a hammer. It was a key that deactivated the ancient containment systems installed by the architects all over the planet. Across the Earth, in the deepest and most inaccessible places, gigantic mechanisms that had slept for millions of years began to stir. Towers that distorted gravity rose from beneath the Sahara Desert. Tsunami generators activated in the Pacific Ocean. And in Siberia, in the permafrost, glaciers began to melt, revealing not mammoths, but giant cocoons, inside which something living was moving. The hammer of Lucifer did not create. It awakened. It awakened the ancient terraforming network of the architects, which now, without control, began to operate in a chaotic, destructive mode. Armageddon had begun, but not a biblical one, a technological one. Cortez's team engaged the heirs in battle right in the ice cave. It was a fierce, desperate fight. People were killing each other over an artifact that had already triggered the mechanism of their own destruction. In the heat of battle, one of the heirs, realizing what they had done, tried to destroy the hammer by striking it against a rock. An explosion of incredible power occurred, but not a physical one. It was an explosion of pure information. The hammer, being a tool of the architects, contained their knowledge. And this information, like a virus, was uploaded into the minds of everyone in the cave, both Aegis agents and the heirs. In an instant, they understood everything. They understood the nature of the universe, the history of ancient wars, how the terraforming systems worked. But the human brain was not prepared for such a volume of knowledge. Almost everyone went mad or was simply burned alive from synaptic overload. Only 2 survived. Colonel Cortez, whose will had been forged in dozens of battles, and one of the young scientists from the heirs of Thule, who was not a fanatic, but simply a deceived idealist. They both now possessed the knowledge of gods, and they realized that the only way to stop the unfolding Armageddon was to use other artifacts. Their last, insane hope was the Spear of Sorrow. They understood that its power was not just agony. It was the ability to focus and direct psychic energy. If they could combine their efforts, using Cortez as the operator and the scientist as the source of knowledge, they could attempt to use the spear to send a mental command to the entire planetary network of the architects. The command, stand down. The finale of the story is not a battle with monsters. It is a battle of minds. 2 men in a secret bunker at the bottom of the ocean stand before an ancient, dark spear. One of them, a soldier, takes it in his hands, preparing to endure all the pain of the universe. The other, a scientist, begins to dictate to him, in a language not spoken on Earth for billions of years, the cancellation code. And outside the bunker walls, the world is collapsing. Tsunamis are wiping cities off the face of the earth. Earthquakes are splitting continents. From the Siberian cocoons, the first creatures are hatching. And everything depends on whether 2 men, the heirs of their own worst enemies, can unite and speak the word that will stop the end of the world, and whether they can remain human after doing so.